Welcome to episode 6 of the Resilience Rundown. I'm your host, Thomas Bryant, and I have the pleasure today to be speaking with Josiah Dykstra with Trail of Bits. Josiah, welcome to the show. If you could you maybe share a little bit more about yourself with our listeners and watchers?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Trail of Bits. We're a software security research and consulting firm. We do threat assessment, threat modeling, everything from applications to AI. I spent the 19 years before that at the National Security Agency, so large cybersecurity problems as a practitioner and a researcher. And about 10 years ago, I sort of fell down this rabbit hole of people. I have a Ph.D. in computer science, and I know a lot about how this computer works, but I never had to take psychology, economics, and I got really, really interested in that. Met a lot of smart people. I started reading Danny Kahneman. I got introduced to a now colleague, Doug Huff, at Johns Hopkins University, and we started looking at behavioral economics. He had written a fascinating book called Irrationality in Healthcare. And as with lots of these books, they're not written about cyber, but I read all of them thinking about problems in cybersecurity. So we ended up doing some papers together. I ended up co-writing a book on cybersecurity myths and misconceptions. And so humans are a big part of that because I think that intersection of people and cyber is really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's we were talking to somebody on one of the prior resilience rundowns, and it was amazing, just like some of the statistics about how a lot of it is, it's social engineering and some of those aspects, and it's fascinating. And you wrote a paper about action bias. I was wondering if maybe we could start there, and you could share a little bit about what is it, and how does it manifest itself in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'd love to start there. And actually, let me back up one baby step, which is to talk about bias generally, and I'll get to action bias in a second. So our human brains have this built-in strategy that honestly ignores some of the information in the world around us. And that's really, really helpful because the world's a complex place. And it lets us make decisions quickly and efficiently. If you think about learning to drive, when you first learned to drive, you had to pay attention to a lot of things sort of very carefully. And now you probably zone out for the most part, and you can probably drive to work without thinking so much about it. One consequence of this helpful feature, though, is that those shortcuts can lead to errors because we deviate from sort of rational human judgment. All humans have this. We can't get rid of it. It affects even people in cybersecurity. So incident response is one kind of risk, and people want control, right? And so an incident is a situation where we have this feeling of loss of control. If your house starts on fire, heaven forbid, you probably want to do something about that right away. Like, don't just watch and admire the burning. That's not very helpful. But unless you have a plan, your sort of knee-jerk reaction kick in. Throw water at it, whatever it is. Save your life, save your pet, save your photos. And so this decision-making in the heat of the moment is where I started to think about how do we make decisions in things like incident response. And the danger is if you don't have a good plan, you might do the wrong thing. You might spend extra money that you didn't need to. In the worst case, you make the problem worse than it was already. So the house is on fire and maybe you make some choice that causes the neighbor's house to burn down.
Yeah.
All bad things. So that brings me to action bias. And like that fire in the house, it's this natural human inclination just to jump into action when there's a threat. That's not weird. It's actually perfectly reasonable. The trouble is it's not always rational. And there's a difference here. And so when we have that knee-jerk reaction, it says, well, we want to just do something, do anything. And unless we have enough foresight, we end up in these bad situations. So there's lots of examples of this. I'm happy to sort of point out some of those.
Yeah, I mean, so how does it impact decision making when we're talking about like cyber incidents? Like what are examples of action bias when it comes to like cybersecurity specifically?
Sure. There's actually, when you start to think about it, pops up in a lot of situations. And one easy to think of situation is phishing incidents. So a classic example is somebody gets a phishing attack and it is an encouragement for them to take a sort of urgent action. Like, all of the money in your account is gone unless you do a thing. Or we're going to revoke your driver's license unless you click here right this very moment. And so those attackers are playing on this human action bias in us that we're trying to mitigate some risk without thinking. And that's what they're counting on.
Mm.
Don't think about it, just act. So that happens all the time. But it happens not only to us as victims, but even as cybersecurity professionals. So let's say there is some kind of breach. Whatever happened, maybe the phishing victim let an attacker into the network. The SOC might fall for this same kind of mental error. And maybe they say, we need to reset the password of everybody in the company, right? One person got in, an attacker's in our network. We're going to forcefully require everybody to reset their password. That feels like the right thing to do in the moment. But unless that decision was made sort of carefully and strategically, it might cause worse things to happen. Like, let's imagine you never trained people about how to pick good passwords. And then you say, all right, everybody go pick a password. It's going to lead to pandemonium, right? It's going to lead to a worse situation than the one you actually have in your head.
Oh, that's fascinating. I guess about more people start writing it down. They don't remember it. It's new. There's all kinds of different things that can kind of happen as a result. I mean, so in a way, I guess there's the consequences can be kind of large in some cases, right? If we overreact. So, as we think about like action bias and like, are there effective countermeasures or like, I guess strategies is the easier word for me, that organizations can use to like mitigate the negative effects of action bias?
Yeah, there's at least a handful. So one is, in general, like preparation is always better. And that's easy for us to say in this like cold state, by which I mean like there's no crisis going on. Yeah, of course we should plan. Sure, it takes some time away from our day jobs to do the preparation. But that kind of strategic thinking, as I'm trying to point out, really does help with mitigations. But it's not just having like a playbook or a run book on the shelf, but you got to rehearse it, right? In the same way we do fire drills with kids, we do tornado drills in some parts of the country. Being able to exercise that plan when there's a real crisis and our minds have this sort of tunnel vision about what do we need to do. Having to make a new decision or deal with a new situation means we're not going to do a very good job. So having the plan and then rehearsing the plan, that is really the right place to start. But that's not the only thing. I think there's a necessary sort of step, which is sort of understanding that patience is a virtue, that there is a reason that I'll come back to the story of goalkeepers here in a second, but what looks like maybe doing nothing might be the strategic right choice, which is we're going to watch and wait and see what happens. That can be really frustrating for your board of directors, for your shareholders, for the CEO of the company. In fact, sometimes that is the right thing to do. And that takes patience. It takes a little bit of education. And it's sort of a culture thing. And what I said about soccer is action bias was studied in professional goalkeepers. So in penalty shots, which is a sort of one-on-one situation, about 1 in 6 of those shots in general gets blocked. The person kicking the ball has a much better advantage. Yeah. And some researchers looked at this in general and said, well, usually the goalkeeper has a split second to decide, how am I going to defend this large space? Should I jump to the left, jump to the right?
Yeah.
What they learned was if the goalkeeper just stood in the middle and did not jump, they would block more shots.
Really?
That doesn't feel good, right? It looks like the goalkeeper is paralyzed. The fans are going to be mad. The coach is going to be mad. Why didn't you do something? Why didn't you jump?
Yeah.
Even though in that situation, research shows it's the best thing to do.
Wow. That's, fitting today with like Champions League games going on, and fascinating in general, but wow, really not move at all.
And it's not that it's not moving. It's that it's a strategic choice, which is, I know that this will be the better outcome in the end. Yeah. Even though from the outside, it looks quite different.
Yeah. You stunned the keeper.
Right. This happens in other sports too, where like hockey players talk about the puck moving in slow motion, right? That the game moves in slow motion. And it's not that they're moving slowly during the incident. It's that they've done so much preparation. Their brains can just process fast events in real time because they've rehearsed. So when I talk about slowing down during an incident, it's not necessarily that you don't need to react quickly. It's that you've moved the slow thinking before the incident ever occurred. So spend the time in preparation so that when it happens, you already have a carefully thought through plan that you can respond to thoughtfully.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, do you find with the organizations that a lot of them have plans? One of the things that I'm curious about specifically, like to a point you made earlier, was plan, but then test and test and test and test. Do you find that more companies tend to have a plan and don't test, or is it like a mix of the two?
I don't know that I have a good representative sample of the entire field here.
Yeah, right.
I think it's probably some combination. I certainly know people who have nothing. Small business, for example, might just not be able to have the foresight or the thought or the time or the money or the expertise to do that.
Yeah.
Maturing organizations might say, yep, we know we need a plan, but we don't have time to test. And then the mature organizations, not necessarily the largest ones, just the ones who prioritize this, they have done more sort of reasonable preparation.
Okay. So, I mean, it's almost like there's kind of that maturity model of just where are you kind of along that journey in terms of planning and then testing. It doesn't matter necessarily big or small. That's fascinating. Well, that's all we've got as far as today. So I want to thank you, Josiah, for coming and answering some questions about action bias. If folks want to get a hold of you or learn more about action bias, or just, where can they reach out on the socials, where can they find you?
Sure. I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's a great way to find me. The book, Cybersecurity Myths and Misconceptions, covers this and a whole bunch of other biases and other issues that we've sort of seen in general. But yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming. Cheers.
Thank you very much.